What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorials.eu. In this video you are going to vastly improve or start your skills as a full stack web developer using ASP.NET and Angular. During the next 2 hours, Yannick Leisman, a friend of mine and a co-instructor, will guide you through the basics of front-end development using Angular and TypeScript. And then we'll follow up with some important lessons about the basics of back-end development with ASP.NET. This free course will cover 5 days of our 21-day challenge. That is our full stack web developer masterclass, and you can find the link to it with a significant discount in the description below. This should and will give you a big jump start in ASP.NET and Angular. So open up your Visual Studio and get ready for amazing 2 hours of learning to code for the best stack out there, in our opinion. I'm sure this will serve you well for your future projects, and I'm also sure that once you're done with this 2-hour journey, you're a significant step forward towards becoming a successful junior web developer. So I would say let's get started, and I'm handing over to Yannick. Alright, so before we start with the course, let's go over what you will learn in today's video. So the video is split into 5 days, basically the first 5 days of our 21-day challenge, as I said earlier, but you will also be able to obviously do them in one go. So if you decide to finish them in one go for it. Otherwise, you can obviously also just do them day 1, then day 2 on the second day, and so forth as they were initially planned. So the idea is that it shouldn't take you more than half an hour to an hour 30 to finish each day, depending on the complexity and the depth of the day. So on day 1, we will begin by understanding the differences between multi-page and single-page applications. We'll get started with TypeScript and then dive straight into Angular by exploring the world of Angular components. Day 2 is all about interaction. We'll explore the concepts of one-way binding and event binding in Angular. These are the building blocks that will let our application communicate with users seamlessly. On day 3, we'll initiate the construction of our flight booking portal and learn about routing in Angular. This will enable us to navigate between pages effortlessly. On day 4, we'll build the search flight page, design a visual appealing HTML page, and install the iconic font awesome library using Node. Additionally, we'll learn about TypeScript interfaces to ensure our code is clean and robust. On the final day, day 5, we'll switch gears and work with ASP.NET Core to create our REST API. This will be the backbone of our portal. We'll also install Swagger, which we will use for documenting and testing our API. After these 5 days, you will have a functional base for a flight booking portal. The front end will be built using Angular and TypeScript, and it'll communicate with our powerful ASP.NET Core REST API backend. Additionally, we'll have learned how to use Swagger to test our application. So a bunch of really valuable skills. That said, we are now ready to start our first day of the course. I wish you all the best.
Welcome to the first day of the challenge. Today, you will be learning the difference between multi-page web applications and single-page web applications, which we can develop using Angular. You will also learn about Angular components, and we will cover the programming language that Angular is using, which is called TypeScript. So you will get a brief introduction into TypeScript today. As you already know, during that challenge, we will cover Angular, then we will cover ASP.NET Core Advanced, and then we will combine both together to create a complete application. So for today, there is some theory which is really important because we are doing some computer science here, right? And computer science is based on really sometimes more or less complex technology. So for example, before we start using real Angular, we should talk about what Angular in detail is and why it is getting used, right? So that you really get some in-depth knowledge. Let's start with discovering multi-page applications, MPA. MPAs are applications that download an entire web page as the user needs to see it. So here on the left side you can see the web server, which is hosting an application, for example. And on the right side you can see the client browser. So as the client browses through a website, he wants to see a specific page. That request gets sent to the web server, and the web server then returns that page, which needs to get downloaded by the user's browser. So whenever a user wants to see a page, he sends a request to the server. The server then puts the data the user needs to a web page and renders it as an HTML, including CSS and JavaScript to make it interpretable by the browser. Afterwards, the server returns the rendered page to the browser of the client. Now, the browser unloads the currently loaded page, so the existing one, and loads the currently new and fresh received one to display to the user. So a simple page navigation in an MPA requires that the user needs to wait for such a cycle to get finished. And that happens whenever the user clicks on a single link. While this can be useful for websites with a relatively small number of web pages, it's not always good to make users wait for a postback with each click, especially when the application requires a lot of user interactions. So you might know that from other applications around the web. You click on something, you have to wait, and afterwards you make another click directly. For example, you want to edit something or you want to add something, and it just takes some seconds, right? And that sums up to a minute or 2 minutes, and you haven't really done much, but just waiting every time like 5 or 10 seconds is absolutely annoying if you really want to perform some actions. It's not really that important when you just go to an article site and it loads once and then you can read for like half an hour. But if you have to do a lot of clicks and a lot of page switching in your application or in an application, then the user needs to wait a lot. Now let's talk about how we can solve that issue. How can we minimize the time a user needs to wait during his interactions with a web application? The solution is pretty simple. We need to minimize the amount of data that needs to move over the network while the user is interacting with the application. So we can build more responsive apps using the SPA single page application technology. That enables developers to minimize the data transmission across the network during the time the user interacts with the software. So to sum it up, this is what you will learn in that challenge. You will learn how to create a single page application using Angular, how to develop and connect a RESTful API using ASP.NET Core Web API, and you will also learn how to make use of Entity Framework Core to store and access data, and some best practices by using the clean architecture software design pattern. So that besides of keeping your users happy, you can also make the job of maintaining the software more exciting for yourself and for your teammates. Great, so now you know what an MPA is and why we instead want to develop a single page application using Angular. Now let's move on to the next video and explore Angular and single page applications even further. Welcome to this video. Let's talk about TypeScript in combination with Angular. As I already said, Angular uses TypeScript by default for developing those single page applications. TypeScript is transpiled to JavaScript to be interpretable by browsers. Browsers by default run a JavaScript engine, so they can interpret JavaScript language by default. JavaScript itself is a dynamically typed language. It checks the variable types at the runtime. TypeScript, on the other hand, is a superset of JavaScript for design time support, for type safety and tooling. Just like C# file extensions, which are CS, TypeScript file extensions are TS. TypeScript is created by Microsoft. The syntax has many similarities to C#, which is good for you, right? And this is a TypeScript class, for example. So you can see just in C#, we also here got the class keyword, for example, the class name and the curly braces. So just as in C#, you can see the class keyword here, the class name and the curly braces. To make a class accessible from the outside of this file, we should export it. So in C# you would use something like public, you would use those access modifiers. If we want to here make use of that class, we will have to export it. That's why we use export here. And always be aware that TypeScript is a case-sensitive language. So as in C#, keywords are written in lowercase. For sure, you can also define a field in a class, just as in C#. Here we can see a field called title of type string. Notice that we first got the name of the field, which is title, and then the type value, and then the type of that field is assigned after the column that we got right here. So this is the name, and it is of type string. You can also set a default value for the field and change it as it's needed, right? Just as in C#, here we got a default value now, which is a string for sure. And TypeScript automatically infers the field type when you initialize the field with a default value. So TypeScript can see that now the title is a string, so we don't have to define the type manually if you don't like to do that. So we can skip defining the types explicitly to make the code easier to read. So let's skip defining the type here. And based on the default value, it infers that the type of this field is string because we're using a single quote right here. If you would like to create an array, you would follow exactly the same pattern as in C#. You have that default array braces and items are comma separated inside there. One thing to mention is in comparison to C#, you don't have to define or predefine the length of the array. So here we can simply add and remove elements, right? At C# you have to say, okay, I want to create an array with like 10 or 15 elements. But here it's exactly the same rule. Since the type is inferable from the initial value, we can also here omit the type definition. So we can here also say items is an array instead of like here saying it's a string array, right? It automatically get inferred. So TypeScript can see that this is an array of type string. Okay, let's stop here. Let's make a short break. And in the next video, we continue talking about some more advanced TypeScript, such as classes and some more stuff. Welcome to this video. Let's talk about some additional TypeScript information for you. So we stopped at creating arrays, and this here is how you can create a method. So just as in C#, you again have that name of a method. You have a parameter written in TypeScript syntax. So you get the name of the parameter, the colon, and the type. And then you have the type or the return type of that method. Again, the colon, which is void. So in C# that would be void log string text, right? So void log and then parameter string text. And here in TypeScript we got log, text of type string as parameter, return type of that method is void. So from an architecture side it's exactly the same, but from a written side we changed the syntax and the keywords just a little bit. You can easily define variables in method bodies just as in C#. So here we have a variable var message of type string and the value is message and it includes the parameter right here. So it uses the parameter. TypeScript again is capable about seeing that this variable here is a string because we are assigning a string right here. So we can shorten it up and remove the type definition. So var message is equals to message and the parameter text. So this is exactly how you can also write it down in C# code. Now if you want to call a method, you can go ahead and do that just like this, console.log message. This would for sure print out a message into the console, but just as in C# you call the class and then you call that method and then you paste in some parameters to provide the method some information. Methods are public in TypeScript by default, that's important. So private methods should be marked explicitly using the private access modifier. So as we got that here, private log, right? So if we just say it like this, log, then it's public by default. And if we want to make that private, we do this by using private keyword access modifier. Like fields and variables, you can omit method return types when they are inferable from what the method returns. So here we got the private log method and we can remove the return type void here. Here, for example, we got the sum method and the parameters are of type number, A and B, right? And we can remove the return type of that method because we are definitely returning a number here because we are using A and B. So if we use A and B and they are both of type number, then we will here return a number 2. So it's inferable and we don't have to define the return type right here. Now you can see that this keyword right here, and it's mandatory before fields and methods in TypeScript when you want to access them from within a class, right? You know that from C#. Let's just assume you are creating an instance of that app component here, right? So you have a class in C# called car, and when you create a new car using the new keyword, then you have an instance, right? That's because C# is an object-oriented programming language, and such as is now also TypeScript. Well, sort of. So, and if we create an instance of that app component and we want to call something on that instance or change a field or something like that, we have to talk to exactly that instance, and we can do that by using this. So if we create an instance of app component and we want to call inside of that class a method, then we go ahead and call this instance.log, right? So this is always referencing that one instance that we are talking to. I mean, that's pretty basic computer science knowledge when it comes to object-oriented programming. So just keep in mind, you can create instances of classes, for example, and if you want to do something within this class, you will have to use this keyword. Alright, let's move on. So here you can see that we can omit semicolons as long as you write different comments in different lines. So we don't have a semicolon right here because we are writing 2 comments in 2 lines. If we would go ahead and write this.log B right behind this log A, then we would have to use a semicolon for sure. But that's how it's also working in other programming languages. So as long as you write a comment in each line, you don't have to use semicolons at the end of your comment. Now TypeScript has some primitive types built in, which are number, string, and boolean. This is just like number, like float, integer, string, you know that from C#, and boolean is the bool from C#, right? You can also define variables of the type of classes. So here we got a variable with the name app of type app component, and it's a new app component, right? So exactly how you would write it down in C#. Well, you would not use that column, but that's not really important. But you can here see that we create a new instance of app component by using the new keyword. And here we got that nice constructor called, which will get called when the instance is created or during the instantiation process. Let's move on. This is how you can define arrays. So you get a variable with the name A. It's a array of type number, array of type string, array of type boolean, and even an array of our custom type, for example, app component, which we could have just created. Okay, so now those are the basics of TypeScript. In the next video, we will just make a very short extension to that and talk about so-called decorators, which we can use in TypeScript, and Angular makes use of it a lot. So it's very important that we talk about that, because that's also something that you won't find in C#. So this is something for a separate video. See you there. Welcome to this video. Now we talk about decorators, and we will take a look on our Angular project to see some TypeScript in action. So this video will not be that long, and afterwards we will have completed that TypeScript section. So look at this TypeScript class right here. It has a component decorator on top of it, and Angular uses such decorators to determine how to deal with decorated classes. So for now, just keep in mind that you can use the decorator and put it right on top of a class to decorate it. Sort of like an attribute in C#. So here you can see that component decorator again, and it has some more options like the selector and template URL. See that this is an HTML file, app.component.html. Now in a minute we will swap over to our project and you will see that in action. But for now, let's stick with the theory just for a second. Angular enables developers to create custom elements in addition to the HTML element. So if you didn't know, you can create custom HTML tags. That has nothing to do with Angular, but you can do it, and you can combine it even further with Angular. So you can see this is an HTML tag right here, and that HTML tag got created by the user, right? So it's a custom element. Now in Angular, custom tags are called selectors. So this custom type here is a selector. When you create a new Angular project and open the index.html file from your IDE, so Visual Studio, the body tag will contain an app root, and we already saw that in a previous video, and the app root tag acts like a placeholder. And inside of that app root here, Angular puts in the templates that we create when we start our application. Templates are pieces of HTML code, and Angular replaces the custom tags with the templates they point to. So app root here is a template, and the content of that template is this HTML code here, right? So you got that HTML, you have another component, app.nav, or another template, and you have that default HTML elements here, and the app root will get replaced with its template code here in runtime. So this is what Angular is doing, right? It's replacing the tags with the templates they point to. And as I already said, templates may also point to other templates internally. So here app.nav menu is another template, and router outlet is also another template. So, but how does Angular know which template to render and replace with which tag? An Angular component is a TypeScript class that can specify which template to be replaced with which tag. So you got that selector here. Just remember that component decorator we have just seen a couple of slides ago. And here we have that app root selector. So we define it here and we say, okay, go ahead. And every time you find that selector, replace the selector with the following HTML code, which is exactly this one here for this example. When you create a new project, the app component exists in it by default. So we will now swap over to our project and take a look at the app component and see if we can find that component inside of our testing project. Okay, so here we are in our project, and when I now open the client app folder, which contains the Angular project, and open up the source folder, you can see that we here have the app folder, and inside that app folder we got the app component HTML. Let's open that up. So here we got the HTML part. Let's switch to the app component. You can see this is TypeScript. We have that decorator here, right, which has the selector and the template URL. And when we now open up the index.html, which we have right here, index.html, you can see that app root here. So app root, this selector will be, or this tag will be replaced with the content of that app component HTML, because in our app component we have that selector app root. So go ahead and take all app root tags and replace them with app component HTML. So here we got an app root, and it will get replaced with this HTML template code right here. So this was just to get you started with Angular. Don't worry too much, we will get through all of this in detail while writing some code. So yeah, let's sum it up. So this is the end of day one. It was a lot of theory, but that's very important when it comes to computer science. So today was the only day where we really talk so much about theory. Over the next days, there's so much more practice stuff so that you really get your hands dirty writing code. Let's just recap what you have learned today. Multi-page applications render each page on the server side and download the page each time the user navigates to a new page. Single-page applications usually download the template for all pages by the first request and request for the missing data when necessary. And Angular is a component-based single-page application technology which uses TypeScript for development. Also, for sure, we took a look at TypeScript in general, and I briefly introduced you to the topic of Angular decorators. Alright, I hope you enjoyed day one, and I'll see you tomorrow in the next video. Welcome to the second day of the challenge. Today we will mainly focus on data binding. In one of the last videos I explained how to define fields for classes in TypeScript. You can see this right here. Here we got a class and we got a field here. Now we have attached a decorator here, which makes this class for Angular a component. But exactly like other classes, components can also have fields, so there is no difference. Now the main difference is that we can use the field message right here and show it inside of an HTML template because it's a component. So now that my component here is using the component decorator, we can go into HTML and show the value of the message field, which is hello world. So on the right side, we have bound the message field of the component class to be displayed on the template. It's interesting that if we change the value of the field at runtime, the framework will automatically update the template and the user sees the updated value immediately in turn. So this here is the data binding syntax. So those two curly braces, which you can use in HTML to grab the field from the component. We will see that in action just in a couple of minutes. Now, once you update the value hello world here in runtime, so you change it by code, you will immediately see the changes also in the front end in the HTML. For sure, components can also have methods like other classes. Now, can you guess the most interesting part here with methods? Like you can see that here, update message. Exactly, we can bind them to events from templates. Here in our template, which is HTML, we have created a button. And inside of that button, we created an event handler with the name click. And to this event, we assigned a listener update message, which is exactly the method in our component class right here. So once the button in HTML gets clicked, update message will get called. So as you remember, in the default project in our Angular template, we have that increment counter page. Now let's see what happens behind the scenes. When the user clicks this button, the click event of the button is called, and the button's click event is bound to the increment counter method. The increment counter method is called every time the event is fired. The method is simply incrementing the current count field of the components class by 1, and current count field is bound to the template. So by changing its value from the component, the template is automatically updated. The user immediately sees the value incremented by clicking the button. The increment counter method could also request more data from the server if needed. And the increment counter method could also request more data from the server if needed. But there is no need to ask the server to do something which can be done on the client side. Calculations would be accomplished much quicker on the client side when possible. So let's sum this up. Angular data binding features enables the component class to communicate with the template. Now let's switch over to our project and take a look on that in a more practical way. Oh, and by the way, if you're looking for a way to massively boost your C# skills, make sure to check out our C# Progress Academy, which is a self-paced online course that teaches you ASP.NET Core, Angular, unit testing and even C# software design patterns in depth. We offer a 14-day money-back guarantee, and I'm absolutely sure that this is the fastest way on how you can progress as a C# developer. So you can find the link in the description below or popping up right now at the top right corner. Now let's explore our template even further so that you get the best possible understanding of where you start. Now we finally want to take a look at our counter component to see how the data binding is working, but let's start somewhere else. Inside of the project, navigate into the client app folder, sources, and open up the app module.ts. Inside here, I want to show you this router module here. As you can see, here we are defining the routes for our project. So you can access the counter page by writing down /counter/fetch-data, and this is the index page or the so-called home page, right? So the counter page is displaying the counter component, which is a TypeScript class, and the fetch-data page is showing the component fetch-data component, which is also a TypeScript class with a component decorator for sure. So let's see at our home component here. Let's right click on that and click on Go to Implementation. Now, as you can see, this is a TypeScript class. Let me scroll in a little bit here so that it's getting a little bit bigger on your screen. We have that TypeScript class. It's called home component and it has no content at all, right? It has no methods, it has no fields, nothing, but it has a component decorator here, which has a selector, the HTML tag, app home. And once we can find that app home once we can find the app home tag in our HTML code, the home.component.html template will get rendered, right? And we can find that in home component HTML. You can see this is what then will get rendered. We already talked about this. So what I wanted to show you is where our navigation or our routes are defined, and that's happening in the important file called app module. Now, one thing to mention here is take a look at home component, counter component, etc. You can see, first of all, they have declarations right here, but also they are imported here. It's exactly like the using statement of a namespace in C#, right? So you go ahead and import the counter component, which is exported. So go ahead, go to implementation again, and you can see export, right? This is what we had in the very first video where we said, if you want to use a class in TypeScript somewhere else, you need to export it. And this import statement here, this is like using in C#, like when you use a class inside of a different namespace, right? You have to import it using the using keyword. All right, now go ahead and start the application using Control F5. You can follow along or you can simply go ahead and watch the video straight away. It really depends on what you want to achieve. If you want to take a look at the code on your own and scroll through it a little bit, then go ahead and open up a test project and, well, go through it. Once the application is loaded, go to counter, and here we have that data binding again, right? So in the last video, we already talked about how it's working in detail. So once I click increment, you can see data binding happening. Let's explore this in our template. So close this and go ahead, navigate to app folder, open the counter folder, and now we got counter component, which is here, and counter component HTML, which is the template. Let me just pull that over here and zoom a little bit out in both sides so that you can see everything you need to see. Let me get that a little bit away. So, all right, let's see. We have our counter component on the left side. It has again a component decorator, which makes this TypeScript class a component, right? So you can see the selector app counter component. On the right side, you cannot see that, right? Where do we find that app counter component? On the left side, we got the counter component class, which has a component decorator, right? So as you can see, the template URL is showing counter component HTML, which is what we got on the right side right here. Now let's explore it here. We got that current count, which is a field, and we got that method, which is a counter increment, right? So this method simply increments the counter like we have discovered earlier. So now here you can see the button, pay attention there, and it has a click event, right? You're using that simple braces here, and inside of them you have the name of the event for the button. For example, it's click. Now there are different event types, we will cover them, but we keep it simple. The click event is the most common one used for the button for sure. And once you click the button, the increment counter here is called. And for sure we have a name of that button here, increment. Now let me switch that to full screen mode here again. Take a look at the paragraph tag that we have right here. It's rendering a bold element, and here you can see the data binding happening to the current count field of our component, right? So here we're using the double curly braces and we're binding it to the current count. So how can we do that? Why can we access the current count here? That's pretty simple, because the template URL is matching to our content right here, right? This is the count. So in easy words, we are able to take the fields from the component, from the template, or from the related template, right? So for this counter component, the counter component HTML is the template. So this template can use the counter component fields, and the only one we have right now is the current count, which is that one here. So this is how you can use data binding, or this is how it's working here right now. Now let's explore this with our fetch data also. On the right side, move to fetch data folder, open fetch data component and fetch data component HTML. So let me close the other ones, and here you can see a little bit of more stuff going on already, but it's nearly identically, it's just a little bit more, right? So on the right side, we have the component. You can see we have a component decorator here again. We have our class, we have a constructor, and we have an interface. So like it's an interface, it's just like a class. Just think about that, like just an object. And here we got some HTTP stuff going on. Everything's not that really important, right? It's really more about like that field here, public forecast. I mean, all of this here is simply mock data, which is getting fetched by that, well, HTTP call here. So it's not real data, so it doesn't, or we shouldn't care anyway. So here we got public forecast, weather forecast, which is an array, right? Now, on the other side, we can take a look at our template now, HTML, and see if we make use of that forecast field. So let's switch over, and here we are in the template. And you can see that we have a table here, we have a t-hat, and inside of that t-body, we are using a loop, right? So ng4 is like a for loop in C#. So for each, or let's call it a for each loop, that's a little bit easier to, well, to say in an easy, or let's say it's a for each loop, that's easier to explain. So for each forecast in forecasts, right? So this is just the Angular kind of way to write a loop. It's directly inside of an HTML tag. And you can see ng4 let, which is like var, right? That got replaced with let, which is like var. So for let forecasts of forecast, and forecasts is that one right here. So this is the field. So we are looping through that field, and then again we are binding it using the double curly braces to the element which we are looping through right now, right? Forecast.date. And forecast.date, temperature C and F and summary is exactly that, what we got right here inside of that interface, because that array is of type weather forecast, right? So I think you really got the point. So your key takeaway is more of how data binding in general works, that you have a component, and inside of that component you have fields, and you can access those fields from your HTML template. And now you already know that Angular has some sort of specific syntax for data binding, for example, and we got specific keywords to write loops, for example, in Angular. Now you have finished the second day of this 21-day challenge. From tomorrow on, things will start getting really excited, since we're starting our course project, which is the flight booking portal. So we needed to talk about data binding, components, TypeScript basics, and all the other things we have discovered so far, so that you are now prepared in the best possible way to get started with your first real project. So I'm very excited to get started tomorrow. I hope you are also, and see you in the next video. Welcome to the third day of the challenge. Today we will set up our project and take a look at basic routing in Angular. So let's talk about some more theory before we really get started and get our hands dirty. So in multi-page applications, when a user clicks a link, an entire web page is downloaded from the web server, as we already know. And the current page is unloaded and it's replaced with a recently downloaded page. Page navigation mechanism is different in single page applications though. When you click the counter link in the default application, the counter component is loaded to a specific portion of the page and the rest of the page remains unchanged. The unchanged part is the app component, the default main component of our application. The app component includes a container for other components. The container is called a router outlet. When a user clicks a link, the Angular framework loads the corresponding component into this router outlet. But how does Angular know which component to load to the router outlet? We can set path or addresses to Angular components. Paths are different from selectors. Developers can create links to the components which have path assigned to them. The Angular framework loads the component into the router outlet when a user clicks a link. A pair of path and component is called route. Angular routes are different from ASP.NET MVC routes. MVC routes are addressed to controller actions, whereas Angular routes are usually component paths. When a user clicks an action link in an MVC application, a request is sent to the server and a controller action is called. However, Angular routes are component addresses. Whenever a user clicks an action link in an Angular application, the Angular framework finds the component based on its address, then loads the component into the router outlet without sending a request to the server or without reloading the page. Alright, so now let's hop over, let's create our flight booking portal project and let's discover routing, clean up the project and really get starting developing on it. See you in the next video. Alright, welcome to this video. Now let's get started. Let's create our course project, which is also again using the Angular and ASP.NET Core template, and we call that project flights. So let's go ahead and create a new project here. Simply search for Angular, or you will have it here on the left side if you have just created a project already. So ASP.NET Core with Angular, right? But again, I will just show it. Search for Angular. You can see this right here. Don't use the standalone TypeScript project. We use ASP.NET Core so that we automatically have a backend solution. So let's go ahead, click on next, call it flights and hit next. Select .NET 6, no authentication and click on create. So here we have our project now. In the last video we talked about the router outlet, so let's go ahead and check where we can find it. Open the client app folder on the right side and open the source folder. Open the app folder and open the app component HTML here. As you can see, here we got the router outlet. As you can see, here we got the router outlet tag. So as soon as we will click a link in our navigation bar, the component will get rendered into the router outlet. So when we click on the counter page, for example, on the counter link, then the counter component will get rendered inside of that tag here, right? So this is what we have talked about in the last video inside of the presentation. Now let's open up the app.module.typescript. Let's scroll a little bit down. I already showed it earlier in a video, but here we got all of our path defined. So here we see the path, the URL, and the matching component, right? Now let's take a look at the nav menu component. So on the right side, open the nav menu folder and open the nav menu component.html. Here you can see, when we scroll a little bit down, we have fetch data, counter, and home. You can see that router link attribute right here, right? And you can also see the assigned path. So /counter/fetch data. And this one here is home, right? So there is no real path, it's just a slash that's default for home. So once you click on that A tag, he will search for a route path, right? And he will see now, okay, it was a route for counter, so I will go ahead and render the counter component and its template inside of that router outlet, inside of the router outlet. All right. So now we have to clean our project. Let's first of all get it starting, hit Ctrl F5 to start the application, download all the dependencies, etc. so that all of these importing errors are gone. And afterwards we will start cleaning up the project so that we really start without any unnecessary code files and HTML template files. So here we have our application. We can click on flights, right? We can find that also inside of the nav menu component HTML, and we got home, counter, and fetch data. So we don't need that weather forecast, and also we don't need the counter, so let's get rid of it. So let's remove all components, but nav menu and app, we will keep them. So home component right here, let's remove it. And then we got fetch data right here, let's also remove it. And also the counter component right here. Now you can see that we got some errors in our app module, for sure, because we simply removed all of the content. So let's get rid of these 3 components here, save it, and it's going through the entire file. So let's simply just remove those components wherever they are used. So here we got that path, etc. Please now go ahead and remove counter and fetch data, but keep the default one right here. We will adjust it just in a second. So let's save it. Now pay attention. We have that path here, which is, well, trying to access the home component, which we have just deleted. So this is the default path, or the path or the content that we want to see as soon as we start our application. Now we don't have the home component anymore, but we want to create a new component, our, let's call it search flights component, right? Because we're using, or we are creating a flight booking portal. So searching flights will be very important. So we need to replace the home component here with our own component, which we will have to create. And we will do that in the next video, because that's something you will have to use very often when you develop projects in Angular. Welcome to this video. We will now create an Angular component because, as I already said, we need to replace that home component, which we have deleted, with our custom component, which we will now create. So since we are developing a flight booking portal, we will now create a component for searching flights. So we will call it search flights. First of all, we will use a comment to generate that component. We can only do that, or this comment is bound to Angular because it's an Angular comment. We can only use that inside of an Angular project. So right now, our flights project right here is not an Angular project, right? It's a main folder, which also contains an Angular project and an ASP.NET Core project. So right click on Client App here on the Client App folder and click on Open in Terminal. Now you can see that we are inside that Client App folder, and that one is our Angular project. Now go ahead and run the following command. Call ng for Angular, g for generate, c for component. We call that component search minus flights, and we need to configure that component and attach it to our app module. So use the module flag app, because that's our default app module. We will see just after we have created the component what this does. So for now, this is what happens. Angular generate a component with the name search flights and attach it to our app module. Now let's get ahead and hit enter. And as you can see, we have created several documents right here. We have that search flights component HTML, right? This is the template. We have that flights or search flights component.ts, which is this TypeScript file for the component. And we have CSS, which is for styling. And also you can see that update in our app module. So let's go ahead there first. You can see here search flights components, right? So this is what the module flag did. It already imported everything here, just the component that we have created, and also attached it into the declarations so that we can make use of it right here. So let's go ahead and use search flights component here. Now this is the main route now. So as soon as we start the application, we will see the search flights component. Let's save it right here and take a look. On the right side, you can now see a folder called search flights. When you open that folder up, you can see all the files that just got created. Let's open up the TypeScript file. Here you can see the component, right? Automatically got created a selector. We got the template and some additional styling. Here we already have a lifecycle hook, which is called ng-on in it. We will get to that later. And we also have that template search flight works. So let's go ahead and save it right here. Hit Ctrl F5 to start the application. Great, now our application has started and you can see search flight works. Let's just get rid of the nav menu that we have right here. We just removed all of the components, but the nav menu still contains some HTML. Move to the nav menu component HTML. Here you can see all the information. Let's remove all of our links. We can keep the home one, that's totally fine. So remove all of the list items, but keep the home one, which I have just marked right here, because that one has the link to router link, only a slash. And that one, let's save it, is completely matching our app module configuration right here. So path like this is exactly like this, right? There is no difference. So our default page will be our search flights component. Now launch the application again. And now you can see that we have removed the nav links that we have right here, right the item. So now we have only home. We can click on flights and it's always directing us to exactly the same page because that's the only one we have left right now. So we have successfully set up our course project and cleaned it so that we are ready to start. Now I will see you in the next video tomorrow. Welcome to the 4th day of the challenge. Today we will continue working on our project. We'll take a look on how to install packages and add some HTML forms. So we will build our search flight page where you can actually search for flights. We will need to use some icons, right? Something like a plane icon, for example. If we want to do that, we will have to install an additional library, which is offering us really a lot of icons. That library is called Font Awesome. We will get to that in a second. In an earlier video, I told you that Angular is using Node, and Node is offering the NPM, the Node Package Manager, which is just like the NuGet packages that we have in Visual Studio, but for JavaScript. You can search and find different packages from the npm.js website. And if you want to install a package, you simply go to the client app folder, open the command line, and then we run a command, which you can see here, npm install, and then add the package name that we can find at npmjs.com. If you want to learn how to use the up-to-date version of other npm CLI comments, go to docs.npmjs.com/cli/comments. So npm is offering us a complete CLI, console line interface, where we can run different comments. So in our case, for example, we can install the Font Awesome package like this. npm install add Font Awesome /Font Awesome -free. This is how the package name looks like. Alright, now let's switch over to our project and directly add this package to our project. Alright, welcome to this video. So this is the page I'm talking about. This is npm.js, npm Node Package Manager. Let's search for a library called Font Awesome -free. There we go. The iconic font, CSS and SVG framework. Let's go ahead and search. We can simply click on that link here directly. And on the right side, you can see install npm I add Font Awesome /Font Awesome -free. Let's go ahead and copy that. Now on the client app folder, right click, open in terminal, so that we are directly in the correct folder inside of that terminal. And after initializing, which takes just a couple of seconds, we are able to run comments. So let's go ahead and simply paste the comment we have just copied. Hit enter so that it's getting installed. And now the package is installed. So we have added it and now we need to apply it to our Angular project. So go ahead and open up client app folder. And on the right side, you can see Angular JSON file. Double click on that to open it up. Let me zoom in a little bit here. And now scroll a little bit down here under root architect. You can see the assets folder. And here you can see styles, right? And this is where you can already see it. Here's Bootstrap referenced. We can here also add our new, Font Awesome free styling sheet. So let's go ahead and do that. If we install a Node package, it will be in a folder called node_modules /add Font Awesome /Font Awesome -free /CSS /all.css. And you can find that Node modules folder in your project structure. So there you can find the final path to that file. Alright, we will come to that Angular JSON file just in a second. I got some presentation sheets for you to explain what's happening here. And now we have referenced our Font Awesome or Font Awesome package, which is a styling sheet directly here in our Angular JSON. And now we can make use of it in our project. Alright, that's it already with this video. Let's move forward to the next part. Welcome to this video. In the client app folder of our Angular project, there is an Angular JSON file which you have just seen in the last video. This file is intended to configure the Angular CLI. For example, you can specify differences between your development version, your production version, and for example also your alpha and beta version. And in the last video you have seen how you can apply new CSS styles to the entire application, including all of its components. Alright, so this is just an addition to the last video to tell you that you can use that Angular JSON file to configure your builds and serving. Welcome to this video. We have created our search flights component already. And here I just started the application and you can see search flights work. Now we should display some fake data here. Now we should modify that page, add a form where people can search for flights, but right now we don't have a backend. So we cannot really grab any real data. We should now go ahead into our component TypeScript class and create some fake data so that when we in the end send a form to search for flights, we will get some fake data delivered. Let's do that right now. Simply switch over to our project and on the right side, open the client app folder, source folder, app folder, search flights folder, and inside there, open the search flights component.ts. Now let's go ahead and add a simple field here. So below the constructor or above the constructor, depending on your coding style, let's go ahead and add search result of type any, which is an array of strings. So let's go ahead and add some simple strings like airlines here. So American Airlines. Second one could be British Airways. And maybe even a German one. Lufthansa. There we go. All right, so let's save it. Keep in mind that we now have a field here, which is called search flights, which is an array of strings inside of our search flight component. Now let's switch back to the template. And now the template is the search flights component HTML. So in exactly the same folder, switch to the HTML file. Now here you can see what we can see in the front end of our project right now. Search flight works. Now let's switch that code over to, instead of render that paragraph here, render all the information that we have right here using a Angular for loop. We can keep that paragraph, but adjust it a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. Search flights, for example. Now let's write our loop. We create a new div and we configure that for loop inside of the first div tag, so the opening HTML tag. Let's do that. We are using an asterisk for this. So asterisk, which is that symbol here. And then we say ng for Angular for, ng4 equals to, and now we can write the statement or the loop. So let flight of search result, right? And search result is that one here. So if we're talking about a for each loop in that scenario, when we compare it to C#, then flight here, let flight would be string flight in search results. So let flight would be one of those three, right? Default iteration loop. So let flight of search results, and we can access flight, which will then be each of those elements inside of the array, right? Okay, let's go ahead. We use double curly braces for this to add data binding, flight. Now we access flight here from inside of our loop. So I guess you already got the point. Let's save it like this and reload or start our application. And now you can see that we got that paragraph search flights right here. And here we got the list rendered by our ng for loop from our TypeScript array. Awesome. So now you have created some TypeScript code and we used an Angular loop to render some content. Now let's go ahead and add the very first form to our project, which is the search header, where you can search for flights. So this is like displaying some flights or some flight information, however, just in a pretty short way. Now let's go ahead and write the very first form. So see you in the next video. Welcome to this video. We will now create a form for searching flights. So let's go to the search flights component HTML file. And here we got our loop from the last video. And now we need to modify all of this a little bit. So let me add some space between this because we will not touch that loop in this video. Let's get started. Most of the stuff which is coming now is, well, HTML input fields and labels, for example, and we will also add some Bootstrap styling to it. So I will explain that styling a little bit to give you an idea of what Bootstrap can do, but I will not get too much into detail because it's a huge topic and this course is not about styling, right? So definitely go ahead and check out the Bootstrap documentation because it's pretty straightforward. And if you want to build something, go there, visit the documentation and check for that styling classes you want to use, right? Because you can simply right click and then check on which Bootstrap classes are used in your reference on that documentation, for example. So let's go ahead. Instead of that search flights paragraph here, we should first of all add a nice headline or heading, we use h5 tag for this. And also, just want to mention that you can check out the GitHub repository and copy the code instead if you don't want to follow along. I always suggest you to follow along because coding practice is better than simply copy paste. But for sure, if you get tired of writing some HTML code and you just want to proceed a little bit faster, go ahead and copy that, but pay attention on copy paste mistakes, right? So you know that. Go ahead, write the code on your own. That would be the best practice. Simply follow along with me. Let's go. We got that h5 here. And first of all, we add some Bootstrap classes here to make it look, well, a little bit better when it comes to spacing and positioning. So we first add a class called text md-center, and then we add some margin here, margin -5. Let's call it search for flights. There we go. So now we have a nicer headline. Let's take a look. As you can see, when you simply update or refresh the page, we now have a centered headline here. Let's switch back. So when it comes to responsive design in Bootstrap, we should always pay attention on, well, margin, spacing, and all of that positioning stuff. But Bootstrap always provides us some help. So Bootstrap itself is using a grid internally, and well, we can make use of it too, and we should definitely. So that said, we will now start creating our form. Normally, we would go ahead and say, hey, we create a form like this, but we don't have a backend yet, so we don't have a position or like an API where we could potentially connect that form to. So later on, when we combine everything together, we will come back here and add that form tag to configure it and connect everything. For now, we will keep it, because we don't have a backend, we will keep it simply inside of a div. So let's go ahead and write a div here. This will be our main wrapper for this form. Here we add a class, and that class is margin5, right? And we use a grid system here with some space in between, so gap 3. Now, Bootstrap uses rows and columns, just like default table structure, right? So in our first row, we will create one here, class equals to row. We will have 2 input fields. So in each row, we will have 2 columns, and each column will contain an input field. Let's go ahead and build a main structure, div class column. And we will simply copy that so that we have it twice. 1 row with 2 columns. Now inside that column, we will create another div, which is holding the input field and the label. So we also want to show a label so that the user can see some nice text information. Class of that class of that div, form -floating. This is adding a very nice visual effect. I will show that to you later on once we're done here with that HTML stuff. Now we create the input field inside here. Input, and we can add a placeholder here. For example, from. Let's write it in capital letter, from, and a nice class for styling, which is form -control. So this is the class or Bootstrap class for styling input fields. Now go ahead and create a label, add some classes. Classes equals to text -primary, which will adjust the text color, and make it a form label so that it's nicely attached to that input here. Here we can also say from. Now let's take that div, which I've highlighted here, including the form floating, copy it and paste it inside of the column below. Now adjust the text, because this one here is our to, or let's call it destination. And also here, right? So now we got those 2 input fields, 1 row, 2 columns, and each column has 1 small input field, right? And an attached label. Let's save it and let's take a look right now. Okay, here you can see our, well, 2 input fields. Once we click there, you can see that nice floating effect, right? That label, how it's floating, and this is what that floating form is doing. And for sure we can add something here, let's say Berlin, and then we can go, for example, to Madrid, right? Okay, so it's not doing pretty much right now, but we are making progress when it comes to styling. Now let's move on, because we need to add 2 more informations, from date and to date. Afterwards, we will also add a number of passengers, so how many people want to fly, like 1 person or 3 passengers, and then we need a submit button. Let's switch back to the project. Instead of doing everything again now, let's simply copy the entire row. Make sure to grab the correct element, row. Let's copy it here and paste it again. I will zoom out a little bit now. This one will be for date. So here we got from and destination, and here we will change it from date and to date. So let's go ahead and do that. From date and toDate and toDate. Now we need to make another adjustment because those input fields here are not type of string, they are type of date. So let's go ahead and use an attribute which is called type equals to date. Now copy that and paste it in the second input below for the toDate input field. Let's save it and take a look again. Okay, as you can see, we now have a from date and a toDate like this. And once you click on that calendar icon, you can see a date picker popping up. That's pretty cool, right? Now, one more time, we will again create a new row. So go ahead and simply create a new div, assign a class, which is row. And inside here, we again have two columns, class equals to call, simply copy it over. And there we go. Now you will see the result in the end. Let's go ahead and to that column here, add text minus end. Sorry, there we go, text minus end. And now let's add a label here. And that one is saying number of passengers. There we go. And we will add some classes to it for sure. Text is form minus label. Text minus primary, sorry, need to write that inside of the braces, inside of the quotes, text primary and margin top -2. So let me just make a line break here. There we go. So those classes I've just added, form label, text minus primary and margin top 2. And now switch back to the other column, which is here. And here we will now add a div with the class input minus group, because we will now build a little bit more complex structure. Here we simply got an input field, but now we want to style it a little bit different, right? We have that number of passengers and you can say 4 and then you can write something and then afterwards it's saying passengers and then we have another button. So you will see that in the end just in a minute. We are nearly done. Let's create a simple text. We can use a div for that. Class for input minus group and then minus text. That one is saying 4. And then we have another input class is equals to form minus control. That's the default one. We will always use that for inputs. The type here is number and the placeholder is, for example, 1. Now afterwards we will add another text, just as I said. Class will again be input minus group minus text, and that one will say passengers. Now to wrap it up and finish all of this, we will simply add a button, which is then, well, for submitting the form. So a form always has a submit button to send the information and receive some data in return, for example. Let's go ahead, add a button. And it's very important, not really important right now, but important for later, that we make it type of submit, because the button of type submit submits the form. Right now we are not using a form, because we have everything wrapped inside of a div instead of a form, but later on we will adjust it and then we will need that type submit right here. So let's configure it right now. Also we add some styling, button and button minus primary, or button minus primary and button. That way is also fine. And then we go ahead and now we use an icon, and that's why we used our font awesome node package. So then we have a class, fas, then font awesome minus search. So we'll get a nice search icon, and yeah, that's it already. Now we can close the button and we are done. Let's go ahead, save and take a look. All right, now you can see we have that number of passengers here, 4, and this is why we adjusted the styling a little bit to make it look exactly like this, right? So compare it to your HTML code and you will see how it happened that we got that form right here, because we made use of that input group. This is why we used that class, that bootstrap class, to make it look like this. But as I said, go ahead, check the bootstrap documentation. It's really straightforward. And now we got that small arrows here to increase or decrease the number, or we can for sure simply add some value by using the keyboard, right? We also have that button here. We can click on it, but it's not doing anything right now. All right, so our search flight form, let's call it like this, has now some nice styling and some information that we can already enter. So this is a huge step forward. And since this is not only a backend course about ASP.NET Core, but instead is also an Angular front-end course, we will have to take a look at how to build forms, how to style them, etc., so that you are really in the end job ready. Now, you should know that here on that page we will build the most HTML. So once this is done, you have most of the HTML already completed. I know that it's not the most interesting part, right? But it's definitely part of your future job. Go ahead, pay attention, and writing HTML is easy. So this is the easy part, enjoy it. Go ahead, try some things, maybe adjust the styling or simply follow along. You can even go ahead and copy the source code, right? So it's necessary that we build it because in the end we want to have an application that looks nice. And now in the next video we will take a look on how we can use this fake data here, extend it into, well, TypeScript interfaces so that we create one for our flights and then uses instead of simple strings. And then afterwards we will again create some HTML to render all of this in a very good way. Welcome to this video. Right now for our flights we simply use strings, but that's not the information that we really want to have once we search for flights, right? There is more information than only the name of the flight company. So now we will create a more complex object instead of a string, and we use interfaces for this. Interfaces are used as abstractions. They act like contracts that specify which methods and properties should a data type have. So here, for example, we have that interface and the name is time, place, read model. So place, type string, time, also type string, right? And all of this is just like a C# class. But there is a difference between C# interfaces and TypeScript interfaces, because in C# interfaces you always need that implicit implementation, but here you can simply use it like a simple C# class. Great. So you can implement TypeScript interfaces like this. You can see it right here. It's a regular class we've discussed earlier, for example, but it implements the time, place, read model. So this class here needs to have place and time property because it implements the interface, and the interface also has place and time. So the class which implements the interface needs those fields also, or properties. We can simply create a new instance of the interface implementation like with any other type, right? We got that var name type of time, place, read model equals to new time, place. So we got that time, place model here, and we're creating a simple class which implements that model. Now you might be asking, why are we using an interface anyway? We could simply go ahead with a simple TypeScript class, right? So later on in a couple of days, we'll make use of a tool called ng-open-API-gen, which is simply calling our REST API, which we'll create in ASP.NET Core, and then checks which data do I get in return. So what information do I get about a single flight, for example, and that Angular tool then takes the information and builds interfaces depending on it. And we could potentially change it to be classes, but that's a lot of work and we don't need that, since interfaces are a better programming pattern, or well, a better programming behavior anyway. So later on you will see that the OpenAPI-gen will create those interfaces for us. This is why I'm here explaining interfaces to you. And once you have that instance of the time, place object created, you can simply go ahead and set its properties just like this right here. So as I earlier said, we don't need that implicit implementation of the interface. We can directly assign an anonymous object to the interface. So TypeScript automatically checks for the assigned object to see if it has the properties which are expected by the interface. And if it doesn't, the compiler immediately shows the errors, right? So here we go, simply ahead, create that object, time, place, rm, assign its values, and then our variable x is of type time, place. So on the left side, you can see it, how you would use it in C#, right? You would have a class which implements an interface, but on the right side, you can see that we don't need that implicit implementation. We can simply go ahead and create a simple instance of it like this. Okay, let's build our interface for the flights and then create the HTML markup. Hey, and welcome to this video. Let's go ahead and create an interface so that our flight information is more detailed. Go ahead into our search flights component.ts into the TypeScript where we have our search results right here. Now below that class here, which ends right here, we go ahead and add our interface. Export interface. Let's call it flight read model rm. This is just a convention, and we directly add another interface, export interface time place. So this is also time, place, rm. This is for like time and where, so date and place. So this is like place and time information combined. Inside of that time place reach model, we will now add a place of type string, and we will add a time also of type string, because they both come in string format for sure. Now inside of our flight rate model, we're gonna say airline, also type string, arrival, this is time place rm. I think you get the point, right? So our arrival is bound to a time and to a place. So this is why we created that second interface. Now departure is exactly the same. We also have a time place here. There we go. RM. We got a price, also comes in string format. And we got remaining number of seats. So each flight has a specific amount of seats available. And we get that information too later on. So let's go ahead and add it. Remaining number of seats, type number this time. So instead of float, integer or whatever in TypeScript, we have number. Let's save it. Now we have our interfaces set up. This is how our data will come in. However, later on, when we use that Angular plugin open API gen, it will automatically get created, but you definitely need to see how you can do it manually. Now, this is our search result data right now. Let's go ahead and change it. But this time I will not do it directly here. I will simply copy paste it. Just a second. There we go. Now let me replace it here. Let's take a look. So search result, still the same name, of type flight rm array. And then we have that array, and inside we have one single object here. So now you can go ahead and write down that airline, American Airlines, or you can go into the source code and copy that search result array here. So you can just go to the correct commit, which is day 4, go into the search flights component.ts and copy that element and just paste it. So here we got the airline, remaining number of seats, we got departure, which is an object, which is our interface here, time place rm, right? This is what you've learned in the presentation. We can instantiate, or we can create an object like this, and we got the time and place properties set here. So finally we have 3 possible flights, or 3 information about flights. This is our fake data right now. Great. Now that we have that, let's click on save and let's take a look at our application. As you can see, we now have still 3 elements here, but they are more complex typed objects. So this is why we see object, because it's not a single value, because it's an object which has multiple properties and we need to define which one we want to display. So our next step now is to go ahead into our HTML file again, so in our template, and take care about how this information is getting rendered. And for this, we will need to create some additional HTML markup. And afterwards, we have completed our first page, and you will also have learned how you can data bind those specific properties. All right, welcome to this video. You have just created those search result information here. Now let's go ahead and render it really in a nice way. I will just close that window here so that we have some more space, and I'm inside the search flight component HTML. And here we got our form for searching flights. And here you can see we have shifted that below the list of our flight search results, right? So we will now continue working on that. So we can leave the loop right here, the ng4 loop, but we will now remove the flight here and extend it, or write it in a different way and a little bit more extended so that it really looks nice. So first of all, we will render each flight information inside of a so-called styling element card. So we go ahead and add a class which is called card. The text is dark and it has some styling, margin top to 5, and we center the text. Inside of that card, we can add 3 elements. We can add a card header, a card body, and a card footer. For now, we simply go ahead and only add a card body. So create another div, call it class card minus body. Now inside of that card body, we create a card title. For this, we use a heading 6 to create a small one. Class card minus title. Again, you can go into the GitHub repository, day 4, check for that HTML, copy that part if you like, or follow along with me, or maybe just don't write the code, simply watch me coding and then finally copy it over just as you like. We have really a lot of options, so pick the one which suits for you in the best way. By default, you have the best learning experience when you completely follow along. So the card title, we want to bind it to the airline. Let's use our double curly braces to make data binding, attach it to the flight, to the property airline. Now let's take a look. Let's save it and open the application. As you can see, we now have that nice looking cards, and inside of that cards we have a headline. So this is how it looks right now. We will for sure now extend it even further. Below that H6 we add another card title. This time we write it as a div, class equals to card minus title, and we set another color, style equals to color colon, and then I have chosen a color FF3939. Great. All right, so this one here is for the remaining seats. So let's bind it, flight dot remaining number of seats, and then afterwards remaining seats. So if we have 10 remaining seats, this one will be replaced with 10 and then 10 remaining seats. Let me just correct that here. Remaining, there we go, remaining seats. All right, great. Let's take a look again. As you can see, we now have those remaining seats in color red or in a reddish color. You can for sure also go ahead and say color red, but we have that color, well, code here. Now we have some more information like departure, price, booking, etc. Let me just give you a quick preview. Here you can see the final result. So we have American Airlines, we have that remaining seats, we have the departure and the arrival here. And we also have that nice styling element, the price and the book button. So this is what we will build just so that you know how it will look in the end. So let's proceed from here. After the remaining seats div, simply still inside the card body, we add another div. And this div is our grid. So let's go ahead and add that class, the grid, text minus center and gap minus 2. Inside of that grid, we have a row, so class row. Inside of that row, we have a col, class column or col. And inside of that col, we split it up into 4 more cols. So let's go ahead and do that. Div class column. We do that 4 times. So the first one that we have right here has margin 3 to add some space. Then we have an icon, and that icon uses classes text minus primary for setting a color. Then we use font awesome, plain departure, and we set the size by using the style attribute. Style equals to font minus size of 20 pixels, for example. This is exactly how it will look like. This is for the first column. Now the second column also has an icon. This time it uses class fa minus solid, fa minus location minus dot, and we bind it to our flight dot departure place. There we go. So flight departure place. Now let's move to the next column. Here we have some margin 2. Again, we have an icon, class fa minus regular, and outside of that icon, not inside, we have flight dot departure dot time. Let's save it and let's take a look on our application. All right, so it already looks pretty nice. We have that icon, we have that place, and we have that weird looking time, and we need to adjust that a little bit. And for this we will use an Angular pipe. So let's switch back to our project. Here you can see flight departure time, and this comes in an, well, unnatural way, as we have just seen. So we can use a pipe simply that way. Now it's not an OR operator, so make sure that you only use that symbol once. This is the so-called pipe, and we pipe it to date. Let's take a look again. As you can see, we now have a nice date string. Let's move on with the next column. This time I will copy what we have just done in the previous column. Let me just add it here. FA regular and then FA clock. We bind it to flight departure time, but this time date, we add some more value here, short times. Let's go, let's save it, let's take a look again. Great, you can see short time pipe has now added the time right here. Now we can proceed and add that nice middle field of that card, like the nice line and the price. Let's go ahead and add another class inside of a div, or let's add a new div and add a class. Again, we have a column, we have a lot of columns here, right? And inside there is a new div, and we have that style assigned to it, display flex. And inside that div, we have an icon, and that icon has a class fa solid and fi minus circle, and the style equals to margin minus top 50 pixels, for example, and font size of 9. I really need to say that this course is not about design, right? So normally saying something like 50 pixels or 9 pixels or whatever might be a little bit outdated, because nowadays you could use something more relative like percentages or rem, and we could have also created like a complete style sheet only for that, but we decided to go really in a very straightforward direction and simply add, well, we don't have a lot of styling in general or custom styling, but those things that we have, we decided to really add it in the most easiest way possible, because you don't want to spend too much time on figuring out how to position elements, etc. So here we have that icon. Now let's go ahead and add an HR, which is like a very thin dividing line, and we need to adjust it a little bit so that it looks nicer and really fitting to our desired look. So let's go ahead and add display block width is 100% and margin minus top is 55 pixels. There we go. Now finally we need to add another icon class far minus plain. There we got the plain icon again. Style margin minus top 48 pixels. You can for sure adjust it if you like. Let's save it like this, and then we got that closing div right here. So let's take a look at the application. Can you see that line here with the dot and the plane? This is really nice. I mean, in the end it could have been a simple graphic created with Photoshop or whatever, but we made it completely out of 3 different HTML elements and combined them together using some additional styling. So yeah, that's from my side of view, it's pretty cool. Now let's add the price. So inside of that same column, we create another icon, and that icon is using class fa minus USD for $, and we bind that to flight.price. Now let's take a look, let's save it. And you can see we got that nice looking icon here, that $. Great, afterwards we will make a line break. So we add a simple BR tag, and then we add an A tag because we will now create a button. We can also create a button with an A tag. Let's go ahead, class btn and btn minus secondary to make it look gray. And this is a huge button, so btn minus LG for large, and then some margin top so that we have some more top spacing. Then we create an icon inside of that button, class fa minus ticket. And after that icon inside of the A tag, we say book. Now we have a book button. Let's take a look. There we go, very nice. Okay, we have that one direction, we have the departure. Now we need to add the arrival. And for this, we can simply proceed here a little bit faster. Let's go up from that line 86 here, where I got that column M-3. Let me just copy that, including all of the flight departure information up to the short time one. Let's copy it and let's paste it here under a book, but still under a book and outside of that div here. So right below. I will paste it. Let's take a look. It's configured for departure, so we need to adjust it. And before we paste in the code, we add another div. And here we have a class col. And now inside of that column, let's paste the information. Now let's adjust it to be not departure, but arrival. So just change the information from departure to arrival. And also in the icon here, FA plain, not departure, but arrival too, right? So that's pretty nice. Let's take a look at the application. Okay, as you can see, we now have all the information that we need. We have the departure, we have that nice, well, flight line here, we have the price, and we have the arrival. But we need to adjust the styling a little bit more so that everything is inside of one row. All right, so what we do is we scroll to the top, and here we have that row. And that row should have 3 columns. One for the departure, one for the part in the middle with the price, and then we have the one for arrival. Right now we can see that we have all inside of that column. We need to adjust that, so open it up. And now here we got the departure. And here you can see that first div class call which is rendering the price and all of the information here. So start copying from here up to the very bottom where we got that flight arrival time, short time, and then the next div. Let's copy it, close it, and let's see when we close the call here after the row directly and paste in the information here. Let's save it. So I just closed it, and after that one I had it opened. It will look like this. We have one row with 3 calls. This is how it will be arranged in the correct way. So let's take a look at the application. As I said, that one is the information of departure. This is price information and the nice style elements, and this is arrival. Let's see what happens. Great, now we have our desired style achieved. That looks very nice. What I want to do is to go ahead and change the background color of the card, and then we are finished. So in the card body, go ahead and add a style equals to padding 20 pixel, so that we have some more padding, and a background minus color, so that we change it to be like what we have here is E5, EC, F26E, right? So please go ahead and feel free to add whatever background color you would like to have. Now let's take a final look. Great, as you can see, this looks a little bit more professional because it now differs from the rest of the entire application. Awesome, so now we have completed the styling of our search flights page. We can search for flights here using that form later on, and we have a display of those flights we have found in a very nice way. So yeah, I know those videos are not the most exciting one, but as I said, you need to see, or at least you need to code to make applications that also look nice. And building HTML is never exciting, right? It's never really exciting. And the only part that was exciting here is really the data binding stuff, right? So that you see how the data is bound, and also that we can use those Angular pipes to, well, change the format of specific elements, but in the end, building HTML markup is not very exciting at all. However, you need to see how it's getting done so that you know how you can do it. And I guess you know that you should really take a look at Bootstrap later on after that course to see how easy it is to use Bootstrap to build very nice applications, because we can only give you a brief introduction into Bootstrap styling here. Alright, so let me tell you, this was definitely the most or the hugest part of HTML markup in this course. So you have done really a lot of HTML now, and we will not do so much more, right? What we will do is we will add validation later on, form validation, because that's very important. You need that skill as a front end or back end or full stack developer. So we will take a look on how we can use Angular for form validation. Great, I hope you had a lot of fun today, and we will see us tomorrow in the next videos. Welcome to the 5th day of the challenge. Today we will start working on our backend part, so ASP.NET Core. And the server-side application must provide a way to communicate with the client-side app, which is our Angular app in that case. The services the server-side application provides are called web services. In this course, web services will conform to REST API specifications. A generally accepted format for describing web services is HTTP protocol. The HTTP protocol is the request-response model we use on the web. REST API provides a formal contract of how clients should communicate to server and vice versa. Sounds scary? No worries, we are going to see them all in action. To implement REST APIs, we will be using ASP.NET Web API throughout this course, which is very similar to ASP.NET MVC. Oh, and by the way, if you're looking for a way to massively boost your C# skills, make sure to check out our C# Progress Academy, which is a self-paced online course that teaches you ASP.NET Core, Angular, unit testing, and even C# software design patterns in depth. We offer a 14-day money-back guarantee, and I'm absolutely sure that this is the fastest way on how you can progress as a C# developer. So you can find the link in the description below or popping up right now at the top right corner. So far we have worked on the Angular project. Now let's take a look on our ASP.NET Core side. Let's open up the controller that we have here inside of the controllers folder, Weather Forecast Controller. You can see that we have here an attribute which is called route. So once we enter that name here, which is weather forecast, right, that controller suffix gets removed. So once we enter weather forecast as an URL, so http:/localhost:/port and then /weather forecast, we will get into that controller. Especially we will get into this HTTP get, because it's, well, the main GET request for that route. Once we're inside of that method, we will see some data here getting created and returned. So let's go ahead and start our application. Simply hit Ctrl F5. Alright, so you can see our Angular application. Let's go ahead into the URL bar and let's enter /weather forecast. Hit enter and you will be able to see this JSON data package right here, which is actually exactly this information that gets created here, converted into an array and returned. Now this here is type of enumerable, but all of that information will get converted into a JSON format, which is JavaScript object notation, and it's made for transferring data over the web. ASP.NET Web API sends and receives data as JSON format by default. As I earlier said, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a programming language agnostic textual format for data structures designed with both interoperability and human readability in mind. A JSON object is a collection of key value pairs. A JSON object can be empty or contain string fields, number fields, arrays, or even nested objects. So in the end, you may receive some JSON data which looks like this. We have string values, number values, nested values, and even Boolean values, for example. So if we, for example, would have a class called car and a string for the name and like an integer for the build year, it would be like name, Audi, and build year, for example, 1994. Now, when we took a look at our project, especially at our weather forecast controller, I already explained it earlier in this video, but let me just get that again. The project contains a weather forecast controller by default when you create this project. The route attribute on top of the weather forecast controller means that request with this route parameter, weather forecast, you can see that right here, should be routed to the weather forecast controller. Now, notice that word controller right here. The controller suffix is not part of the URL. So now let's continue and change that weather forecast controller here into our flight controller. Welcome to this video. Now let's continue on the weather forecast controller right here and let's turn it into our flight controller. Simply select the weather forecast controller here, right click on it and hit rename. Now let's rename it to flight controller. You can see by doing that, we automatically refactor any reference that we can find here. Let's hit apply. You can also see that the C# file name got adjusted. Now previously we were able to get to that controller by writing down localhost /weather forecast. Now since we used that route attribute, he will now see, okay, name of the controller, which is flight controller. And as I said, the controller suffix gets removed. So we will come to that route by localhost port /flight. So now let's start the application. And in addition to that, I want to show you something else. So, you know, when we have that Angular project and that ASP project, it is like we start the application right here. ASP.NET Core gets started, a proxy gets set up, and we will get redirected to the Angular project once we enter URLs. So right now you can see that launching the SPA single page application proxy, check that we now have localhost 7280. Let's copy that. And here you can see localhost 44492. This is just for me, right? For you it could be different, but there are two ports. So our ASP.NET Core application is running on 7280, and now the Angular proxy gets set up, and then we will always get redirected to the Angular application, which is running on 44492. You can see that right now here. So since we are just developing in our ASP.NET Core project right now, and we just want to test something on the controller, we can now go ahead and write down here flight, and which will actually tries to redirect us. But in the console, when we open it up with Ctrl+Shift+J in Chrome, you can see that the URL is missing in Angular. That's totally fine, that's correct. We just need to go ahead and paste here localhost 7280. This is for me, right? This was the ASP port, and then go ahead and write down /flight. and now you will be able to see the JSON information. So later on we will for sure add a route at Angular 2 so that everything is connected again, but you need to know that there are two ports, one for ASP and one for Angular, and the proxy is the system which automatically redirects us from the ASP program to the Angular project. Now I want to show you where you can find that ports. Inside of the project on the right side you can find a folder called properties, and inside there you can find the so-called launch settings. So open that file up, it's in JSON format written. Now here you can see the application URL and its port 7280, right? So this is the ASP port. So if you want to know any of your port information for ASP, you can go ahead and check it right here. Also, you can configure different profiles. For example, when you later want to deploy your application, you can set up a deployment profile right here, which has additional information like environment variables or other properties. So now in the flight controller, we will get that random information here about weather forecast. We don't really need that. So let's first of all get ahead and remove that summary here. This is really not needed. And inside of our get right here, we can remove weather forecast. Let's simply delete that file. So inside of the project view on the right side, scroll to the very bottom and you can find weatherforecast.cs. Let's delete that file. Now let's switch back to the flight controller. Instead of using that custom type weather forecast, let's simply for now go ahead with string. So IEnumerable string. So instead of returning that weather forecast stuff, let's go ahead and delete it. I will delete everything what's inside of that curly braces, and I will also delete the curly braces. So let's go ahead and here in get, let's rename that get method into search, because it's for searching flights later on. Keep in mind that the attribute here is still HTTP GET. So this method is getting called when we send an HTTP GET request to the search endpoint. Now let's return a simple string array. New string array, and we can add 3 test elements. American Airlines. You can add any of those you know. British Airways. There we go. Now this is a, well, relatively new approach on how you can write simple methods without curly braces. So if you, for example, have a single line of code like this would be, right? We could all write it in one line of code. You can go ahead and write it that way, for example. Now let's save it here. Let's start our application one more time. I've already added the /flight endpoint on our ASP.NET Core port. So now you can see American Airlines, Deutsche BA and British Airways. Great. So our search endpoint right here is configured as an HTTP GET method. And the name of the endpoint is search. And once we enter that URL, right, flight here as controller, flight/search, we will call this right here. We will get this string array as result, and it will get converted from string array into a JSON object, which we can then see in the browser. Now our main goal finally is to take that JSON response here, which will get created from that string array, right? So just imagine we have that string array converted into JSON format, and we will need to get that JSON format into our Angular application and then render the front end. So like our flight search cards, depending on the information. So if we have those 3 informations here, our Angular project will request it once we hit the search button in our front end, and we will get that information and it will get sent back to our Angular project, and then using that information we can show some real data. Now we need to make some adjustments, right? Because in Angular we don't have that simple strings anymore. We have created interfaces for more complex data models. So we need to do that here too. Let's proceed and build some more interesting flight data. Welcome to this video. When we took a look at Angular, we have already created like this time place read model as an interface in TypeScript. Now we need to do nearly the same thing on the ASP backend side. So you are familiar with C#, but there is a pretty new feature or pretty new, well, type, which is called record. So instead of creating a class, which is called time place read model, we will now create a record. And the difference is that records are immutable data structures. So once we have created an instance of that record, you cannot change any fields. In a class, you could simply go ahead and change a field as long as the field is not, or the property is not read-only. But here in records, you cannot change a property after initialization. So here we got the code where we instantiate a new time place read model, and we assign some values to place and time property. Now, once we try to change, to go ahead and say, for example, original.place equals to Berlin instead of Los Angeles, right? Notice original is the name of that model or of that instance. We cannot do that. So the record is denying changing those fields. What we can do, and this brings in, well, a new keyword only for those records, is we can copy the original record and then say original with, and then change the place. So this will create a copy of the instance, but with other values. Now, our main goal is to always teach you some nice practice, some nice new things. So this is why we come here and use records, because they are new, because they are optimized for what we want to do here. And you can also go ahead with classes if you want to use them instead, but we always try to teach you the latest and greatest features of C# and any other framework to make your life as a programmer easier and to always provide you the best and most professional knowledge out there. So in general, we use records whenever the value doesn't need to be changed later on. So imagine it like this. We have that flight in our database which has some additional information, right? Like destination, time, arrival, etc. So once we have that read from the database, there is no need to change the data. There might be a way to change the information in the database, like, oh, the flight got cancelled, right? But once we have read the information from the database and we have that little piece of data in our application memory, we don't need to change it. If something in the flight changes, we can simply click again on update or press F5 on the keyboard and we will fetch the latest data again from the database. So we will get through all of this for sure in detail during that challenge. Now, you can go to this link. You can see right here, if you're interested in more about records, simply go to Google and search for records, which will redirect you to exactly that page right here. Now let's go ahead to our project. We will now switch over and create those records in C#. So here we are inside of our project, and now we will first of all create a new folder which we will call read models. You can go ahead and also call that models, but we will stick with the syntax of read models. So right click in the project, here flights, right click and then simply add a new folder, call it read models. Now inside of that folder, create two new C# classes. Right click on it, add C# class, and the first one is time place rm, time place read model, and the second one, we will also create it right now, is flight read model. There we go, flight rm. Now I will close that C# project here. Okay, now let's go into the time place read model and adjust it. So first of all, we need to change class here to record, and in addition to that, I will zoom in a little bit. We can completely get rid of that curly braces here, right? So simply open up brackets and inside here, write down string for place as a property. This is why we use it in capital letter, string place, and also date time, which is a C# data structure, time. So this is very short and handy, right? We don't have to define any other fields because those two here, those are fields now. They are properties. So for a record, this is all we have to do to create properties, right? Place and time are fields we can use now. We don't have to create like public, string, place, get, set, etc. This is all we have to do. So this is the first one, record, time, place, two fields. Let's move to the flight read model. Do the same stuff right here. First of all, change it from class to record, and then go ahead, remove the curly braces, add default brackets. Now I will write it here, but make a line break so that it's easier to read. And then we need to think about the information that we have here, right? So each flight should have a unique identifier, so an ID. We have the airline name, we have the price, we have the time place read model for departure, we have a time place read model for arrival, and we have an integer for remaining number of seats. So let's go ahead and implement it like this. So the ID, which should be unique, is a GUID, which is a globally unique identifier. GUID, right? Call it ID. Next one, string airline, string price, time place read model for departure, time place read model for arrival, and integer for remaining number of seats. There we go. Now you can see that we have all the information like we have them in Angular 2, right? Let's save it. Great. Let's switch back to the flight controller. And here inside the search method that we have, we need to replace the string here with some fake data. So let's first of all change the IE numeral of type string to of type flight read model. We will have to implement a namespace for that. So write down flight rm, for example, and hit Control dot when you're on Windows. You can load and hit Control dot when you're on Windows, and you can see some suggestions using flight's read model so that we can exit it from the controller right here. Now, instead of returning a string array, we will return a flight read model array. And the content of this is now for sure way more different because we don't have that simple string values anymore. We have a more complex data type. So what I want you to do now is go to GitHub, go to day 5 commit, go into the flight controller and copy the part which is right inside of that curly braces here. So everything what's inside here, I will show it to you just in a second. So I just went over, copied it, and I will now paste it. And as you can see, we now have that code parts in here, which are just some flight read models with all of the data, Los Angeles, Istanbul, Munich, London, and all of this, right? And he's complaining about random. And to fix that random error here, we simply go ahead and above that search method, we create a new random equals to new random, right? So random is coming from the system namespace. So the random is a way for us to create a random price, for example, between 90 and 5,000 US dollar. Adjust the formatting here and we are good to go. That's fine enough. So now we have created some fake data here inside of our flight controller, which we can now send into the Angular application. First of all, let's start the application and see that data in JSON format. Let me just take that /flight, and in the background you can see all of the information. And now it's pretty unstructured, right? Because it's simplified, everything got removed, and it's minified, not simplified, sorry, it's minified, everything got removed, which is not necessary, including all white spaces to keep it really as short as possible so that it's optimized for web transferring. But you can see American Airlines here, you can see the price, departure, which is Los Angeles, etc. So here are all the informations about all the flights that we have received from our search endpoint. So now that we have the information, we can install something which is called API documentation or automatic API documentation. And there is a tool for it which we will use, which is called Swagger. Let's simply proceed and install Swagger in the next video so that you have an automatically generated documentation, which you can also use for testing for your backend solution. Welcome to this video. As I've said in the last video, we will now install a package called Swagger to create some documentation about our API, which we can also use to test it. So never forget that we are developing two things, right? Because this is a full stack course. We are developing a RESTful API and a front end using Angular. At the very first days, we have only focused on Angular. And right now we are only focusing on ASP. In the end, we will combine everything and connect everything together. So for now, let's just focus on ASP. Great. So go ahead to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and then Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. On the top left side, click on Browse, not installed, and search for swashbuckle.asp.NET Core, right? And you can see Swagger tools for documenting API built on ASP.NET Core. We will use that package, swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. Now select it, click on your project or select your project and hit on install. Now afterwards, move to program.cs. And here at builder.services, we simply go ahead and in the next line, we add builder.services.swagger.gen.add swagger.gen. So this is the first line of code we have to add. And when we build the application, scroll a little bit down, you can see this. Let me zoom out a little bit right here. And when we build the application here in line 8, right afterwards, we go ahead and say app.useSwagger and then call useSwagger UI. Now we will see in a second what this does. Save it and let's start the application. Just copy your port, which is for the ASP application, right? So we're gonna copy it and then we simply add Swagger swagger/index.html. Now let's move to that page. So again, it's localhost, then your ASP port, then swagger/index.html. And now you can see your documentation of your code, and you can even test it, right? So this is what Swagger is offering us. So here we got our flight endpoint, which is a get HTTP endpoint, and you can even try it out, right? But here is some example of how it's looking like, of how it looks like. You got that ID, airline, price, string, departure, etc. So this is an example of how an request response could look like. Let's go ahead, let's try it out, right? When we execute it, we can see that we get all the information right here of our example data. So once we click here on try it out, a request will get sent to that endpoint, and we can then see the response here in the body. You can also see that 200 here, which is the status code. 200 means okay, so there was no issue. Let's scroll a little bit down. You can also see our both read models here. So let's open them up. You can see how we are using it. Now, why is that so important? For sure, we can use that to test our API and to provide other developers or users who want to implement our API a good way on how our API looks like. But we also need that, and now this is why we're doing it. We need it because Angular needs to know how the API, the backend API, looks like, because we want to use a tool in Angular which automatically builds the client-side code. So just to get that right, we are in Angular, okay? And we got 10 flights in our backend, let's say database. Now Angular needs to get that information. Right now we have hard coded it in Angular 2, but we will remove it. So Angular is only for displaying values, right? So in Angular we need some sort of client-side code which will then connect to our API to get search results from our database, for example. So this is the final connection. Now, we really don't want to write a lot of TypeScript code from scratch just to write the connection to our API. What we can do instead is really professional. We can just generate some open API standard, API right here, right? So this is following the open API standard. And we can then switch over to Angular later on, simply use a plugin which will then check for that open API, which we can see right here. And depending on that information, the client-side code of Angular will automatically get built. So no worries, we will definitely get to that, but I want you to know why we are doing that right here. So we are not finished yet. We really want Angular to be able to connect, but therefore we need to define a new open API server with a URL so that we can connect Angular to that server, to that API version. All right, let's click on that Swagger JSON link right here. Now you can see in JSON format our API, right? This is exactly what our API in JSON format looks like. So we have a path, which is /flight. There is a get endpoint. Here's an example get response. So depending on all of that information, Angular will be able to create some client-side code, which is then connecting to that database. And we don't have to really write a lot TypeScript. And that's what you want to do, right? There are a lot of tools which can help you write faster code, better code, and even more secure code. So what we just saw was generated by the Swagger tool we just installed. It's called Open API Specification. It defines a public contract for documenting REST APIs. The purpose of that contract is to be both human and machine readable. So you as a person, you can read that because it's nice and clear readable, but also a machine can read and interpret it. So a piece of software can translate it to user interfaces like Swagger UI is doing. So that's just what we saw. We have that open API in the background, and Swagger is just taking that and rendering a user interface, which we can use for testing, for example, right? Or it can translate it to other pieces of code, high-level web clients, exactly what we will do in Angular. An example of that code can be generated from the spec. But we will take a look at that in action tomorrow, because then we will auto-generate the Angular client API from this API specification that we have just seen. So here just another infographic about, on the left side you have that Swagger user interface, and it's depending on the open API document that we have right here, which is exactly our developed API. Okay, now one final last change and we are done. As I said, to make it working in Angular in the end, we need to define an open API server. So let's configure one real quick. Here in add Swagger gen, go ahead and inside of that braces, let's go ahead and say that we want to add a new server to that configuration, right? So we go ahead and say configuration add server. I mean, all of these are pretty straightforward expressions. So add Swagger generation, where this C means actually, and this C means, well, Swagger gen options. Let's call it config, and config goes to config add a server, new open API server, and it has a description and some more information. Let me just zoom out a little bit. New Microsoft Open API server. We can also bring that into a using directive right here. So just a second. That's nicer, using Microsoft Open API models. Then we can get rid of it. So new Open API server. And now we can define two things. First one is a description. For example, description equals to development server. And the second one, and that's the most important one, is the URL. So now pay attention, because it could be a little bit different for you. Go ahead and write that URL just like I do now. https://localhost, and now your personal port for HTTPS. Go into properties on the right side, then launch settings, search for profiles, and then you can see application URL, and this is your port, whatever is here for you. For me, it's 7208. You can see it's for development. And now I switch back to paste it here, and that's all we have to do. So https://localhost:7280, or whatever your port is. Let's start our application one more time. Move again to your Swagger index.html. So localhost, your port, /swagger/index.html. And now you can see that we have that server here, right? So on this server we can use in our Angular project now and connect everything together. So click here on Swagger. You can also see that here, servers, right? So it just got added. Exactly the information that you just have defined. Great. So now we have set up Swagger and Open API in a way that we can use it in our Angular project.
All right, and that was it for the 2-hour mini course on ASP.NET and Angular web development. Quite a few lessons that you have gone through. Congratulations on that, you've done a great job. And if you want to keep going, definitely check the link in the description where you can find the full course, the full 21-day challenge, including additional exercises, more handouts, and obviously the other days of the challenge, where you will build the entire flight booking portal. The entire course is 12 hours in video length, not just the 2 hours that you've seen so far, and also includes test-driven development, which is another very important skill to have when applying for junior developer jobs. Other than that, I hope you liked the video. I mean, you stayed all the way until now. Thank you very much for that. And I wish you the best on your journey to becoming a developer. If you haven't subscribed, please do so now, and also leave a comment if you have any questions or any remarks. And also see you in the next video.